Ooh, shit. Hello. DMG or Jim here. Sorry, I had the wrong screen up. I was looking over there. And hey, good to see everyone. Continuing on with our 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide reading project here. Hopefully the video isn't too bad. I'm shooting at night. Just to kind of keep the striking while the iron's hot. Just finished running a Dragonlance game up at the shop. Coming home and working on a little bit more here. The next section of Chapter 4 is Plan Encounters. This is Chapter 4, Creating Adventures. This is where we're taking our toolbox and some of the other things and making references to future parts in the book to put our adventures together. Get an idea for an adventure, make sure that we're able to connect the adventure idea with the players, and then start planning encounters to support and resolve the adventure. So this is a pretty thick section here. We're going to get into it. So as normal, I'll read first. There's once in a while I'll make a comment if there's something that's really unclear, but we'll read through this section to begin with, and the second part of the video will be my personal commentary. You can push pause at the end of the video and go to the next series, and you're all good. Love having you here just for the audiobook. Or you can, listen to my comments and leave a comment for yourself at the end of it. But let's get into it. Chapter 4, Plan Encounters. Encounters are the individual scenes in the larger story of your adventure. Reduced to fundamentals, an encounter is an objective with an obstacle. It accomplishes one or more of the following: moving characters closer to achieving a goal, frustrating the character's progress towards a goal, or revealing new information. Character objectives. The following objectives can be foundations for encounters. Although these objectives focus on a single encounter during an adventure, using the same objective in multiple encounters allows you to combine these encounters into a larger obstacle or problem that the adventurers must overcome. Make peace. The characters must convince two opposing groups or their leaders to end the conflict that embroils them. As a complication, the characters might have enemies on one or both of the opposing sides, or some other group or individual might be instigating the conflict to further its own ends. An encounter aimed at making peace might involve only social interaction, perhaps with the threat of combat if negotiations go poorly. It could also begin as a combat encounter with the players trying to stop the fighting and get the parties talking to each other. Protect an NPC or object. The characters must act as bodyguards or protect some object in their custody. As a complication, an NPC under the party's protection might be cursed, panicked, unable to fight, or apt to risk the lives of the adventurers through dubious decisions. The object the adventurers have sworn to protect might be sentient, cursed, or difficult to transport. Such an encounter might be a combat encounter or an exploration encounter with either hostile monsters or a dangerous environment threatening the NPC or object that the characters are trying to protect. If the characters are protecting an NPC, this objective can add an element of social interaction to a combat or exploration encounter. Retrieve an object. The adventurers must gain possession of a specific object in the area of the encounter, often with a time limit. This might be a combat encounter with monsters protecting the object, or an exploration encounter with traps or hazards preventing access to the object. As a complication, enemies might desire the object as much as the adventurers do, adding a combat element to an exploration encounter or complicating a combat. Run a gauntlet. The adventurers must pass through a dangerous area. As with retrieving an object, reaching the exit is a higher priority than killing the opponents in the area. A time limit adds a complication, as does a decision point that might lead characters astray. This might be an exploration encounter with traps and hazards as complications, or a combat encounter against hostile monsters. Sneak in. The adventurers need to move through the encounter area without their enemies noticing. This is typically an exploration encounter, but if the characters are detected, a combat encounter or social interaction might result. Stop a ritual. The plot of evil cult leaders, malevolent spellcasters, and fiends often involve rituals that must be foiled. In a combat encounter, characters might have to fight their way through evil minions before attempting to disrupt the ritual's magic. This can also drive an exploration encounter, where the challenge is getting to the place where the ritual is occurring, or a social interaction encounter where the objective is convincing the ritual leaders to stop their rite. As a complication, the ritual might be close to completion when the characters arrive, imposing a time limit. The ritual's completion might have immediate consequences too. Take out a single target. A villain that the characters seek to defeat is surrounded by minions powerful enough to kill the adventurers. The characters can flee and hope to confront the villain another day, or they can try to fight their way through the minions. As a complication, the minions might be innocent creatures under the villain's control. Killing the villain means breaking that control, but the adventurers must endure the minions' attacks until the villain falls. So the next section is keeping the adventure moving. Make sure your players have clear objectives they can pursue at every stage of the adventure. 3 simple techniques can ensure the players understand the task at hand and how to pursue it. Advisor NPCs. A helpful NPC in a social interaction can offer advice and suggestions to the characters. Such an NPC might be the patron who initially sent the characters on the adventure, someone they met along the way, or a character's contact. When you're planning an adventure, include NPCs who can fill this role. An evil intrusion. If things start grinding to a halt, have the characters encounter a minion or monster connected to the adventure's main threat. At the end of the encounter, perhaps the characters find information that gets them back on track. Plan 1 or 2 encounters like this ahead of time. The DM's role. If the characters can't figure out how to solve an encounter or aren't sure what to do next, you can remind the players of things their characters have already learned, or call for intelligence investigation or similar checks to see if their characters can remember and connect things that the players might be missing. The next section is something for everyone. As described in the Know Your Players section in Chapter 2, players have different tastes in the activities they enjoy in the game. An adventure needs to account for the different players and characters in your group to draw them into the story. An adventure that includes a balance of exploration, social interaction, and combat is likely to appeal to a wide breadth of players. But an adventure you create for your home campaign doesn't have to appeal to every possible player interest, only the players at your table. You can design encounters that appeal to multiple player motivations. Imagine a fight pitting the characters against a gang of gnolls, delighting the players who enjoy a fight. Then a young dragon wanders in the middle of the fight. Suddenly the fight can swing of one of 2 ways. The dragon could help the gnolls against the party, or help the party against the gnolls. It's up to the players who thrive on acting to persuade the dragon to help the party. Multiple ways to progress. Make sure there are multiple ways the characters can progress through the adventure at any point, so if they miss one way, they have an alternative. Plan opportunities for the adventure to move forward even when the characters fail. Use challenges with a single path to success only as chances for the characters to obtain extra rewards. Social interaction encounters. The Running Social Interaction section in Chapter 2 offers advice for handling social interaction encounters and can help you craft these encounters. The non-player characters section in Chapter 3 is also essential for creating these encounters. Not much there. Exploration encounters. An encounter centered on exploration might involve the characters trying to disarm a trap, find a secret door, or discover something about the adventure location. An exploration encounter could also involve the characters spending a day crossing a rolling plain or traversing vast caverns. The Running Exploration section in Chapter 2 can help you craft these encounters as well as run them. Various sections in Chapter 3 can also help you detail obstacles and dangers in an exploration encounter. See chases, curses, and magical contagions, doors, environmental effects, hazards, poisons, and traps in the Toolbox Chapter 3 for particular stuff. In particular, Had to clarify because it was spread out there. Sorry. Combat encounters. The following features can make a combat encounter more interesting or challenging. Changes in elevation. Terrain features that provide a change of elevation, such as stacks of empty crates, ledges, and balconies. Reward clever positioning and encourage characters to jump, climb, fly, or teleport. Defensive positions. Enemies in hard-to-reach locations or defensive positions force characters who normally attack at range to move around. Hazards. The Hazards section in Chapter 3 describes dangerous features such as patches of green slime that characters or their enemies can use to their advantage. Mixed monster groups. When different types of monsters work together, they can combine their abilities, just like characters with different classes and origins. A diverse force is more powerful. Reasons to move. Use features that encourage characters and their enemies to move around, such as chandeliers, kegs of gunpowder or oil, and rolling stone traps. The next subsection is combat encounter difficulty. Excuse me. Use the following guidelines to create a combat encounter of a desired level of difficulty. Step 1, choose a difficulty. 3 categories describe the range of encounter difficulty. Low difficulty. An encounter of low difficulty is likely to have 1 or 2 scary moments for the players, but their characters should emerge victorious with no casualties. 1 or more of them might need to use healing resources, however. As a rough guideline, a single monster generally represents a low difficulty challenge for a party of 4 characters whose level equal the monster's CR. Moderate difficulty. Absent healing and other resources, an encounter of moderate difficulty could go badly for the adventurers. Weaker characters might get taken out of the fight, and there's a slim chance that 1 or more characters might die. High difficulty. A high difficulty encounter could be lethal for 1 or more characters. To survive it, the characters will need smart tactics, quick thinking, and maybe even a little luck. Step 2. Determine your XP budget. Using the XP budget per character table, cross-reference the party's level with the desired encounter difficulty. Multiply the numbers in the table by the number of characters in the party to get your XP budget for the encounter. So here's your XP budget per character. This is a large table. The character goes from level 1, party level on the left column, going from 1 to 20. The next 3 columns are breaking us the encounter difficulty into low, moderate, and high encounter difficulty, as discussed prior. The numbers that are listed are the amount of XP, your budget, the value of the monster that you use. You can find this value on their stat block for each type of encounter. These are your starting points in your guidelines. For example, a level 2 party for a low difficulty encounter could fight 100 XP worth of monster. Moderate is 150 and high is 200. This is your starting point for your budget, okay? A level 10 party, by comparison, has a low XP threshold of 1600 XP for the budget. The next one is moderate at 2300, and a high difficult encounter could be 3100 XP. So the next step is step 3, spend your budget. Every creature has an XP value in its stat block. When you add a creature to your combat encounter, deduct its XP from your XP budget to determine how many XP you have left to spend. Spend as much of your XP budget as you can without going over. It's okay if you have a few unspent XP left over. Some examples are given below. Example 1. A low difficulty encounter for 4 level 1 characters has an XP budget of 50 times 4. Each character, XP budget per character. Okay. 50 times 4 for a total of 200 XP. With that, you can build any of the following encounters. 1 bugbear warrior that's worth 200 XP as a single creature. 2 giant wasps worth 100 XP each for 200 total. 6 twig blights for 25 XP each for 150 total. Notice they did not spend the 200. Example 2, a moderate difficulty encounter for 5 level 3 characters has an XP budget of 225 times 5 for a total of 1,125 XP. With that, you could build either of these encounters. 2 Nothics worth 450 each, and 9 Sturges worth 25 XP each for 1,125 total. 1 White worth 700, a Warhorse skeleton worth 100, and 6 Skeletons worth 50 each for 1,100 XP total. In Encounter 3, a high-level difficulty encounter for 6 level 15 characters has a budget of 7,800 times 6 for a total of 46,800 XP. With that, you could build this encounter. 2 adult red dragons, 18,000 XP, and 2 fire giants, 5,000 XP each for 46,000 total XP. That's a hell of a fight. Troubleshooting. When creating and running combat encounters, keep in mind the following. Many creatures. The more creatures in an encounter, the higher the risk that a lucky streak on their part could deal more damage to the characters than you expect. If your encounter includes more than 2 creatures per character, include fragile creatures that can be defeated quickly. This guideline is especially important for characters of level 1 or 2. Adjustments. A player's absence might warrant removing creatures from an encounter to keep it at its intended difficulty. Also, die rolls, that was bad, and other factors can result in an encounter being easier or harder than intended. You can adjust an encounter on the fly, such as by having creatures flee, making the encounter easier, or adding reinforcements, making the encounter harder. CR0 creatures. Creatures that have a CR of 0, particularly ones that are worth 0 XP, should be used sparingly. If you want to include many CR0 critters in an encounter, use swarms from the monster manual instead. Number of stat blocks. The best combat encounters often pair one kind of creature with another, such as a fire giants paired with hellhounds. Being mindful of the number of stat blocks you need to run the encounter. Referencing more than 2 or 3 stat blocks for a single encounter can be daunting, particularly if the creatures are complex. Powerful creatures. If your combat encounter includes a creature whose CR is higher than the party's level, be aware that such a creature might deal enough damage with a single action to take out one or more characters. For example, an ogre CR2 can kill a level 1 wizard with a single blow. 2d8 plus 3 is potentially 19 damage. A level 1 wizard is going to be lucky if they have 10 hit points if they stack their con. Commentary, sorry. Unusual features. If a monster has a feature that lower level characters can't easily overcome, consider not adding that monster to an encounter for characters whose level is lower than the monster's challenge rating. The next section is monster behavior. Big section. The attitudes, motivations, and behaviors of the monsters in an encounter help determine how a social interaction plays out and whether it might erupt into combat and influence the course of combat. Initial attitudes. A published adventure typically notes or implies whether a creature's initial attitude toward the adventurers is friendly, indifferent, or hostile. In an encounter you've created, you can decide that starting attitude, or you can randomly determine it using the initial attitude table. Initial attitude, it's a 1d12. So on the left column, the right column is simply a reflection of the attitude. For 4 or lower, the initial attitude is hostile. For 5 through 8, the initial attitude can be indifferent. For 9 or higher, it's friendly. We have an asterisk here. Roll different dice to alter the range and likelihood of possible attitudes. For example, you could roll 1d6 for a predatory monster, 1d6 plus 3 for ordinary travelers, or 1d6 plus 6 for kind-hearted individuals. Monster personality. If an encounter involves a significant individual, use the guidance and non-player characters section of Chapter 3 to flesh out the details of that individual's personality and aims. For a group of nameless monsters, you can decide on a personality based on the monster's entries in the monster manual, or you can use the monster personality table to determine, to inform how you portray the monsters and their actions. It's simplest to assign the same personality trait to an entire group of monsters in an encounter. For example, one bandit gang might be an unruly mob of braggarts, while the members of another gang are always on edge and ready to flee at the first sign of danger. So here we have a table listing monster personality. The left column is based on a D8 roll. The right column gives you options or the results of the roll for personalities for the monsters. Level 1 is cowardly, surrenders easily. 2, greedy and wants treasure. 3, boastful, makes a show of bravery but runs from danger. 4, disorderly, poorly trained and easily rattled. 5, fanatical, ready to die fighting. 6, brave, stands firm against danger. 7, jocular, taunts enemies. 8, orderly, difficult to rattle. Monster relationships is our next section. Encounters with groups of monsters can be more interesting if rivalries, hatreds, or attachments exist among the monsters in the group. The death of a much revered leader might throw its followers into a frenzy. On the other hand, a monster might flee if its hunting companion is killed, or a mistreated toady might be eager to surrender and betray its boss in return for its life. You can use the monster relationships table to inspire such relationships within a monster group. So this table is based on a D6 describing monster relationships. If you roll a 1, 2 monsters have a bitter rivalry. Each wants the other to suffer. On a 2, one monster, bullied by the others, hangs back and flees at the first opportunity. 3, one monster is revered or even worshipped by the others who will die for it. 4, one monster is admired by the group. Its allies try to impress or help it. 5, one monster cares only for itself and not the rest of the group. 6, one monster bullies the other. It forces them into danger, but they want it defeated. Okay. The next section is reactive tactics. This is going to be some thick commentary, long video. Warn you now. Reactive tactics. A great way to make an adventure location feel alive, particularly an organized base or stronghold, is to allow its denizens to react to the presence of the adventurers. Once they are aware of trespassers, sapient creatures might either fortify their own locations or leave those locations to assist colleagues and expel the invaders. Take a copy of the adventure map and pencil in the locations of all of its inhabitants to give yourself a sense of where they're located relative to each other. When the adventurers engage in combat or any other noisy activity, assume that the nearby creatures hear the noise and are alerted to the adventurer's presence. Creatures that can't hear might be alerted by vibrations or other sensory cues. Once alerted, a creature has several options. Ambush. The creature leaves its current location and takes up a position near the adventurer's location, hoping to catch the adventurers unaware. Ambushers try to hide, and once hidden, take advantage of any opportune moments to attack. Fortify. The creature attempts to fortify its locations by using furniture or heavy objects to block doors or entryways. Increase the DC to force open a blocked door by 3 and hastily block passageways or difficult terrain. A creature with a ranged attack that selects this option seeks cover in its location. Hide or flee. If possible, the creature hides in its current location, hoping to avoid any adventurers that enter. If there is nowhere to hide, the creature flees to a location farther from the adventurers or flees to any nearby location occupied by its allies. If a fleeing creature reaches allies, those allies are immediately alerted to the presence of the adventurers. Determine how those allies react. Investigate. The creature rushes to the sound of the disturbance to investigate, possibly joining any battle that is underway. A creature that passes near an ally while moving to investigate a disturbance might ask that ally to accompany it. If you can't decide what an alerted creature would do, have it make a DC 10 Wisdom saving throw. On a successful save, the creature either investigates or lays an ambush. On a failed save, it hides or fortifies its location. When dealing with a group of creatures, the leader makes this saving throw on behalf of the entire group. As creatures employ reactive tactics, make notes about their new locations on your adventure map. The next step is prepared defenders. Sapient creatures that have reason to believe their lair is likely to be invaded might set up a defense. Reasons to set up a defense include the following. Adventurers invaded their lair recently and then retreated. Scouts affiliated with the lair's denizens noticed the adventurers heading towards their lair. A spy in a nearby settlement overheard or discovered the adventurers' plans and alerted the lair's occupants. Prepared defenders commonly use one or more of the following tactics. Ambushes and barricades. Some defenders might move from their original location to locations where they can hide near critical passageways. Defenders might also use furniture and debris to block off passages, hoping to channel invaders towards prepared strongpoints. Sentries and alarms. Some creatures might move from their keyed locations to locations that allow them to monitor entrances to the lair. If possible, these creatures might equip themselves with an alarm such as a horn or improvised gong, an empty kettle perhaps. At the first sight of intruders, they raise the alarm, alerting nearby allies, so those comrades can employ the reactive tactics described above. Traps. The defenders might place additional traps such as falling nets throughout the lair. If the denizens of an adventure location employ any of these tactics, update your map as appropriate. Encounter pace and tension. A good story hooks you in with an interesting introduction, builds tension steadily through the story, then reaches a climatic conclusion. It's not always easy to mimic that structure in an adventure where the players control their characters' actions, but you can use encounters you plan to build tension towards a climax. Each encounter in an adventure is an opportunity to make the character's situations more complex and urgent, with more significant consequences. Successive encounters raise the tension in an adventure naturally, as characters spend their limited resources. Variety also contributes to a sense of escalating tension. Build variety into your encounters in 3 ways. Vary encounter type. Use a mix of social interaction, exploration, and combat encounters. Different types of encounters provide different amounts of tension. Generally, combat encounters offer the most, but they also feel very different and can have drastically different stakes. Vary the encounter difficulty. Include encounters that offer low, moderate, and high difficulty. A mix of low and moderate difficulty encounters early in the adventure can lead to a climatic high difficulty fight, perhaps against the adventurer's primary villain or another threat. Vary the threats. Build encounters using different threats. If the characters are delving into a Kuo-toa temple and therefore expect many encounters to include various Kuo-toa, look for opportunities to include different monsters that might serve as guards, pets, or allies to the Kuo-toa. Include a variety of hazards, environmental dangers, and traps in exploration encounters, and use NPCs with different personalities and different goals in social interaction encounters. Urgency and rests. While successive encounters increase tension, taking a short rest relaxes the tension somewhat, as characters have a chance to replenish some of their resources. In many adventures, though, the characters and their players have a sense they need to act quickly to deal with the situation presented by the adventure. This creates tension between the need to rest and the sense that things are getting worse while the characters are resting. You can influence the pace and tension of your adventure by determining where and when the characters can rest. If their characters are exploring a vast dungeon, consider scattering a few small rooms with only one door, where the characters can bar the door and reasonably expect to spend an hour or even a night resting in safety. On the flip side, cautious characters might try to take a short rest between every encounter, never really straining their resources. It's okay to interrupt those rests once in a while to maintain a sense of tension or to heighten the urgency, making it clear that even an hour spent resting could jeopardize our chances of success. Easing up. It is possible to dial up the urgency to the point the players feel they don't have time to investigate the interesting details they encounter in the world. When this happens, consider using a helpful NPC to take some of the pressure off. A wise elder might advise them that the situation is not as urgent as they fear. A whimsical fae being might use magical mischief to force them to slow down. Or a kindly celestial could tell them that they're taking the concerns of the mortal world just a bit too seriously. Random encounters. Last section, I believe, here for our planned encounters. Random encounters are randomly determined encounters that don't occur in a fixed location. These options are often presented in a table. When a random encounter occurs, you roll a die and consult the table to determine what the party encounters. Sample random encounter tables appear in the adventure examples later in this chapter. Similar tables appear in many published adventures and rulebooks, and you can easily create your own by following these examples. Handled well, random encounters can serve a variety of useful purposes. Creating urgency. Wandering monsters encourage characters to keep moving and to find a safe place to rest. Sometimes you can create a sense of danger and urgency by rolling dice behind your DM screen, even without an actual encounter. Drain character resources by draining the party's hit points and spell slots, leaving the adventurers feeling underpowered and vulnerable. Random encounters can build tension in an adventure. Establishing atmosphere. Thematic links among monsters appearing in random encounters create a tone and an atmosphere that define the environment the characters are exploring. For example, an encounter table filled with bats, wraiths, giant spiders, and zombies creates a sense of horror and suggests the possibility of even more terrifying foes. Provide assistance. Some random encounters can benefit the characters instead of hindering or harming them. Helpful creatures might give the characters useful information or assistance. Reinforce campaign themes. Random encounters can remind the players of the major themes and conflicts in your campaign. For example, if a war between two nations is a major conflict in your campaign, you might design random encounter tables to reinforce the ever-present threat of that conflict, including encounters with bedraggled troops returning from battle, refugees fleeing the invaders, lone messengers riding for the front lines, enemy war parties, and so on. A life of its own. Sometimes a random encounter that starts off incidental can become important to the story. A random encounter with a wandering ogre might end with the ogre offering to help the characters get where they need to go, or the ogre might have something in a nearby den that is significant to the adventure's story, a prisoner, a stolen item, or important information. Or the players might find the ogre's personality delightful, prompting you to make the ogre a more important part of the story. So that's the end of this lengthy section called Plan Encounters. Let me get into a little bit of commentary here. Where to start? I should have commented. This is one of those sections that I should have commented while we were going through it, but it would have taken forever to finish it, and I'm trying to do an audiobook first and commentary second. So, the character objectives. Let's just talk about what's here. We'll focus there. Making peace, protecting an object or NPC, retrieving an object, running a gauntlet, sneaking in, stopping a ritual, taking out a single target. These are all good ideas for objectives for our encounters. Okay, remember we first laid out the premise for what we are wanting to do with our situation. We designed a situation for our adventure, remember, in the first section. The second idea is drawing the players into it. How do we get them interested in the adventure? So the planned encounters thing kind of falls hand in hand with the first two parts. Not to say you can't plan encounters and keep them in a spreadsheet somewhere and have a big old pile of fun stuff to pull on. That's talked about down in the random encounter section. More to the point, now you should have an idea of what you're wanting your players to do. So these are what the whole gist of our adventure is. So these objectives don't necessarily indicate the entirety of your adventure. Number one, 3 or 4 of these things can make encounters that add up to your adventure. Okay, so if they have to protect an object that's under it, first retrieve an object, then protect the object, while they run a gauntlet of 2 armies that are killing each other who happen to be enraged by the existence of this object, maybe they can make peace in this encounter. So, we did all but 4 of these things in one idea for an adventure in a series of 3 or 4 encounters. Sneaking into this holy place guarded by 1 army, retrieving the object, and then having to protect the object as they leave. As soon as the object was removed, the other army is emboldened and attacks. So now you have 2 opposing forces that are fighting each other that your players need to make peace while protecting the object and running a gauntlet of the defenders of the holy place attacking them. Quick and easy, just making stuff up as you go along, but that's the idea behind it. You're not limited to any one of these. A good adventure and a good encounter is going to combine 2 or 3 of a string of encounters for an adventure is going to combine a few of these encounters and types of encounters to go through. Now, here's the other thing: you can swing between running a gauntlet and making peace, as we talked about earlier in some sections. If your players are good at talking, what starts as a gauntlet can turn into a negotiation very quickly. Sneaking in can turn into taking out a single target, etc., etc. So these are good ideas. These are just terms for you to gravitate your ideas around. Not necessarily the only definitions for adventure ideas, but some things that you can go, okay, that's what my adventure idea sounds like. A sneak in, cool. But that's all it's doing. It's not setting up anything that you have to do other than understanding that each component of your adventure is going to be handled a little bit differently based on running a social encounter, running an exploration encounter, or running a combat encounter that we talked about in Chapter 2. Anywho, keep the adventure moving. Yes, there are going to be times where in between encounters your players stall out. You need to have a way that is believable and helpful without breaking the immersion or becoming a crutch for your players. Sometimes, an advisor NPC, the players can be dependent upon. An evil intrusion, if you're trying to move things along, can actually grind things down. It can become a big combat encounter, or it becomes a railroading moment because an evil thing shows up simply to make the players go somewhere else. But it is an option. And then you can always remind your players, if there's things that they knew, ask them to do an investigation check. Hey, man, we talked about this. Why don't one of you guys give me a good investigation or history check to see if you remember any of the clues that we talked about? And then just feed them the stuff. They rolled it. They skilled it. They felt like they did something. Oh, my character. Thank God I made a smart character, because I'm a stupid person as a player. But good gosh, I'm glad my character's got 20 intelligence and a +6 at history. That's allowing for that character build to shine. Something for everyone. So yes, knowing who your players are and what they're interested in, which we discussed in Chapter 2, makes sure that you are informed in your adventure design to plan things that your players want to do. Doesn't mean they get to do everything they want to do all the time ever, but making sure that everyone gets to do something they like to do once in a while is really important to keep a party together, okay? Balancing the stuff is the key, but there might be periods where the story or the campaign or the player's choices push things into certain directions. So it's important to recognize the pace of a adventure turning into a campaign that's leaning too far one way or another, and find a way to kind of interrupt that. The next thing is multiple ways to progress, okay? This is very true. You need to, the idea I talk about on my stream is calling failing forward. If your players have to succeed on a DC 20 stealth check and then a DC 25 sleight of hand check to pluck this gem, and there's no one in the group that's got the skills to do that, you by designing this encounter blocked their progress. They can't move this forward. So if you want to have that really cool defining moment where the specialist can specialize, that's cool. But if they fail, there better be another way for them to go forward, or the group needs to be informed right out the gate back in chapter 2 or session 0. Hey, this is a brutal dungeon. You guys can literally hit fail states. And if the party's okay with that, they're okay with it. But if you're trying to progress a long-term adventure in a campaign, make sure you as a dungeon master don't give them multiple ways to progress. Give yourself a lot of tools and options to move forward when they fail. Failing forward, okay? Social interaction encounters. This was like I don't know why they even put this stupid sentence here, but a lot of that was covered well in chapter 2. As far as anything goes there, you should, along this point in your adventure design, have some ideas from some memorable NPCs, some villains, some shopkeepers, the barmaid schmurple, whatever you want to do, and you'll use the tools that were in chapter 2, running social interactions, to handle social interactions with your characters. Exploration encounters, this is short and sweet because, again, this was covered back in chapter 2, and a lot of the tools to make exploration fun and dangerous and engaging were given to us in chapter 3. No real need here to get into that. There was some stuff given in regards to combat encounters is pretty helpful, though. Certainly reiterating changes in elevation, making sure your enemies, if you need it to be a challenging fight, are set up in defensive positions, not walking down the middle of the path all the time. Hazards from chapter 3, our dungeon toolbox, can add some spiciness to our battlefields. Lava pools here and there. The cavern is unstable, and occasionally an earthquake will rock a couple stalactites loose that fall to the ground and make a DC 10 dexterity saving throw or take a chunk of rock in the head, etc., etc. Mixed group of monsters. We're going to take our 5 dark elves that were in a defended position at the far end of the cavern that's full of seismic activity that are firing down on our high-level party, while the dungeon hazards rock the floor, rock this small cavern occasionally with tremors, as a geyser erupts once in a while, providing steam and cover and heat damage, and the vibrations knock a couple of these columns down, but mixed into these are a bunch of piercers. The larval form of the roper that the drow are feeding near the front of their gate to help restrain targets for capture. I know that's a bunch of different stuff, but I literally covered every single one of these principles in describing an encounter I just made up out of thin air. But they're important to do that as we're describing and talk about that. That's like, yeah, that sounds like a cool fight. That sounds like a fun fight. That's what you would need to look at. But be careful with choke points. Be careful with lines of sight. Be careful with grouping, because sometimes something that looks really cool on paper becomes a one-spell fight as the wizard drops a lucky fireball, and oh geez, that kind of sucks, guys. So anyway, combat encounter difficulty. There's a little bit more here. There's some slight changes to the 2014 here, namely the modifier for the amount of monsters has been removed. You used to have a penalty to your XP budget if you had more creatures because of action economy. That's not a thing anymore. That's why 2014 encounters were always so simple, because the calculator that they used had a divisor applied to it for your number of monsters. That's been removed for 2024. Your 2024 DM's monster XP budget is much more generous than it was in 14. So I'm a little bit more of a believer in this system now than it was in 2014. 2014 was stupid. It was designed as a baseline. If your party knows how to roll a dice and use the most basic thing, this is the level encounter for them. Didn't plan for synergy, didn't plan for characters learning and growing. It didn't plan for anything like that. It was always just the lowest common denominator. This is giving you a little bit more room as a DM to work within a budget for tested balance. It's not going to include the outliers of the amen or the 6 clerics that are out there kicking butt together. You're on a completely different chart when you're playing with that kind of a group. But this is a baseline for you as a beginning DM, as a young fledgling dungeon master, to plan your encounters on that have been tested and balanced. Okay, so these numbers are pretty good and pretty solid. The many creatures adjustments, yeah, definitely this is some good advice for a new DM. Be careful with lots of creatures on small, on low, especially on low level players. You get on a lucky streak, they're down. If you're using many creatures, make sure to keep some of them in large clumps and keep some of them dispersed. That way, your AoE guys get to have their moments in the sun and drop the fireball or put the flaming spear in the middle of the group and roll it around. And hey, I'm a badass. And likewise, your direct fighters, your melee guys, your rogues, your rangers still get a couple single targets to sharpshoot and enjoy their thing. So a many creatures thing can be used. You can go flood the field with a ton of stuff, providing you know your player's abilities and give them an opportunity to use it. At level 2, they can drop a Burning Hands and knock out a cloud of kobolds pretty easily. So using many creatures can add some cinematic flair to a combat encounter. But if your players miss, if you get lucky on die rolls, it can overwhelm them very quickly. Adjustments. Likewise here, pay attention to your encounter when you design it. This is something I can attest to as a professional DM with open public tables. If someone doesn't show up that night, the encounter I planned is by default harder than what the group's capable of. Be ready to drop a couple monsters or to give the players a little bit more space between the, let them see the enemy at 100 feet and the enemy's not aware right out the gate. So your players at least get one round to whittle down the damage. Things like that. There's some adjustments you can make to the encounter positioning, things like that. Alternatively, have a group of reinforcements show up if the encounter is going way too easy. Players get lucky, or if you didn't balance well, have a second group roll in at a bad time. The idea is here keeping balanced, tense encounters, not trying to overwhelm or kill our players all the time. CR0 creatures, 100% with that. In a combat encounter, there's no need for CR0 creatures. Just use your swarms, and use lots of swarms. Let them do some stupid damage. Let your players obliterate it. Players like to kill stuff. And them killing 5 swarms of spiders means nothing to me. I didn't lose anything. That's cheap budget. Number of stat blocks. Early in your career, this is great advice, man. Ooh, this video is going way long. Don't use more than 2 or 3 stat blocks because you got to be familiar with them. Even myself as a veteran, sometimes I skip over an ability or I forget a creature in a I've got 4 or 5 different monsters fighting my party right now, and I didn't read the last line or I forget this ability, and I end up making an encounter a little easier than it needed to because I'm not paying attention as well. So, when I hit like 5, 6 stat blocks, that can happen. 2 or 3 stat blocks, you're good to go. So as a new DM, start out with 2 or 3 stat blocks so you can keep track of everything easy and you can synergize your abilities a little bit more. You won't be hitting yourself in the head going, oh, I should have used this plus that and I would have killed him. Wait, I'm not supposed to kill him. That's right. The next section is powerful creatures. If your combat encounter includes a creature who's bigger, just be careful. Give your party some opportunity to do some range damage to avoid them. Make sure that sometimes you can kind of play a little bit dumb. Just focus your attacks on the guy that's got the most hit points or the most armor class or, the barbarian who's hitting you and finally gets rage. Go ahead and switch to him for a second. Farm out the damage a little bit more. If it's an intelligent creature, it's an intelligent creature. But, yeah, when you're using big and powerful creatures, be careful. Use them sparingly. Know your character's levels and capabilities before you drop something way higher than them in CR. Likewise with unusual features. If your party can't deal with petrification, don't put a basilisk out there. If your party can't deal with petrification, don't put a cockatrice out there. Try to make sure that your players are capable of dealing with the conditions, not necessarily the damage, but a lot of times in lower to mid games, the conditions are an issue. For the Fabled, no one wanted to be a cleric party. They can't deal with a lot of conditions right out the gate. So be careful when you're using ghouls with paralysis. Be careful when you're using stuff that's got 1 hour poisons, things like that. So yeah, that's some good advice there in combat encounters. Monster behaviors. This was a waste of a section, in my opinion. Okay? Mainly because you should know what the monsters are doing in the adventure that you're designing, and you should know why they're in a given position because you're kind of putting it together as a DM. If you are genuinely randomly generating your stuff on the go, and I salute you if you're running that, this could be a helpful set of tools. Other than that, the initial attitudes, the personalities, all of this is not necessary for combat encounters. Now, if you're trying to seed some social opportunities in here, I would definitely look at the monster personality table and the monster relationship table, so you can give some cues in your descriptions of the opposing forces to your players. Might see that there might not be some harmony here. You know, the bugbears and the goblins and the hobgoblins show up, and the hobgoblins say, "Charge!" The bugbears kind of cut their eyes at them and slowly walk to the left on the flank while the goblins mass in front of them. Give your players cues that there are these personalities and these relationship differences in combat, and you can definitely allow for a combination of social and combat encounter interplay. Other than that, I'm not a screw that. Now, the reactive tactics, this is a really good information for a new DM. Remember, dungeons aren't static. Whether it's a genuine dungeon or a cavern or a keep or a mage's tower or a tavern, they're not static. The creatures that are aware of what's going on are going to be aware of what's going on. In a tavern, no, the people that don't want to fight are get out the way. The people that want to fight are going to come streaming in from the side rooms and turn it into a brawl. Our drow ambush thing earlier that I was talking about, the reactive might be at that point. The drow aren't even going to show themselves until a few people have taken damage from the piercers and the ropers got one or two people grappled. Then my ambush starts. Little reactive things you can do. If your players are kicking ass and taking names, and one goblin gets away calling a runner from the back in the good old EverQuest days, the rest of the forces can be on alert. They're going to bring their heavier guns up front. They're going to set up ambushes. Every time the players come into around a blind corner, I should have 4 or 5 held actions waiting for them. I'm not going to kill them, but it's attritional warfare. Remember, goblins have a disengage action and a dash. They have that cunning nimble escape, I believe, if I'm remembering. So your goblin should be able to move into a line of sight, shoot, and then dash to get away. They should always be skirmishing. A goblin should be able to cover 60 feet of movement every turn and shoot. So a cave full of goblins should be a huge deal if you're using reactive tactics, okay? Prepared defenders, kind of the same thing. I think it falls hand in hand with reactive tactics. If your monsters know the players are coming, then you have every right and obligation, if they are smart, to have them prepare their defenses. They shouldn't be wandering around. Oh shit, it's our turn. Pay attention to that. Make sure if you have a guard post, they have something, a horn, a gong, a old kettle that they'll tap on, something, rather than always relying on the one scout to go running in. That's not a bad thing early on, relying on a scout, because your players have the chance to get the one that gets away. But as your players get a little bit more proficient, put the urgency into the situation by having them hit that gong. The one that they didn't see up on the hill rises up and blows the horn, alerting the rest of the valley to the player's presence. Sentries and alarms is a huge thing that can add a lot of tension to your situation really quickly. And we're the dungeon masters, so we control the pace, the pace of release for our forces. We don't have to have every monster in the valley, the keep on the borderlands with the 9 caves of chaos and the probably 200 humanoid monsters that were strung out between them all. One dude blows a horn, they all come running out at the same time. Ooh, that's bad news. You can kind of release forces as needed to keep the encounter rolling, to keep the pace good, to keep the tension high without overwhelming them. But if players are dumb, then you should teach them not to be dumb along the way. Encounter pace and tension, that was kind of discussed in what we talked about above, is, that's all falls together. Now, urgency and rests, man, this is an important thing to keep in mind. You determine when your players rest, they don't. But that doesn't mean you say, no, you can't rest here. Let them go ahead and, hey, we're going to go ahead and take a short rest. Okay, where are you going to set up? Over here. How are you going to do it? Like this. Okay. And if something's 25, 30 feet away, they're going to come rolling in halfway through that short rest. Don't show up right at the start of the short rest. Show up about 20 minutes into it. That way, we're truncating our timeline worse and worse and worse, putting them further back. And I'm not saying punish them every time, but when it doesn't make sense for them to short rest because of danger, because of conditions, because of environmental hazards, then you don't say you can't short rest. Let them short rest and let them take the consequences of their action. Likewise with the long rest. If they had just whirled into the keep, the courtyard of the keep, and battled and lost a lot of their hit points and most of their spell slots, and they see they hear the door bar to the next section, they go, we're going to take a long rest here. About midnight, roll up with all of your archers on the top of that wall and rain arrows on them and be merciless about them. One thing that I make a mistake a lot of, because I get into hurried sometimes during a game, especially when we're busting through a quick long rest. Don't let them push those long rest buttons. Don't let them restore their hit points. Don't let them do anything until the start of the next day, in case something happens during the long rest. You can just play that up to put a little tension in it. Hey, DM, is it a long rest? Well, you guys have laid down. You set out your sleeping bags. You started a fire. Who's on first watch? Give me a roll. Even if you don't have on anything, man. You know, give me a D12. Why? Because I'm seeing if something might wander up in the middle of the night. We're using the random table. You know, do things. But above all else, be consistent with that as well. If they're hanging out and they're having a Midsummer's Eve festival night in the park and everyone sleeps in the park, you know, you don't want to mess the theme up of that, for example, unless you want to have pickpockets show up, but it is what it is. Hopefully you follow what I'm saying. The players determine when they rest. You determine if the rest is allowed. And you don't have to be upfront with your players. They need to figure out when it's safe, but they're only going to figure that out if you impart consequences on it. Either they successfully short rested this time or something happened. They got away with long resting because they went, 5 miles away from the encounter area, found a good gully and slept without a fire. No random encounters. You guys are hitting long rest in the morning, hop up and head back in. So pay attention to the situations they're putting themselves in when they rest. Man, this is going to be an hour video. Shit. Wow. Okay, the last part is random encounters. Some good information here. There's no random encounter tables listed here. Okay, other DM's guides have been full of them for various levels and various environments, things like that. The number one suggestion here is that you are designing random encounters, both combat, social, and combat and social, as it were, because random encounters that tend to find the party. So you're not going to have a wandering canyon run into them. But you can use these to establish atmosphere, things like that. But make sure that if you decide to use a random encounter table, key them to the situation, the environment, the ecology, and the mood and the theme that you're trying to carry on. But it's okay to have a break once in a while to give some levity or to give some perspective to things. I'm going to stop here. The next section is bring it to an end. So we're almost at an hour on this video, so I'm going to bring it to an end now. My apologies. This was a long ass video. Okay, I didn't realize the section was that long as I went. When I started reading through it, but it is what it is. And thank you so much if you hung out for the last 20 minutes of commentary. Keep following the series if you like. We're going to keep reading through. We're almost done with Chapter 4. We'll get on to Chapter 5 here pretty soon. But push that button, that like button, that follow button, that subscribe button, all them fun buttons, all that stuff. Join us over on Twitch for more live chat, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. Tuesdays through Saturdays here in the U.S. And then, obviously, would love to hear from you in the comments here on the video as well. Thank you so much for your time. Talk to you soon.